2 Corinthians 5:7. 2 Corinthians 5:7. I want to take some time this morning and really talk to us men. And I want to start here in 2 Corinthians 5:7. We know it by heart. We walk by what? Faith and not by sight. So we know that. I mean, we got it memorized. We can give that answer really quick. But what does it mean? I mean, what does that mean in real time and in real life? What does it mean to walk by faith and not by sight? So what I want you to do is I want you to hold that thought, because we're going to come back to it. But for a moment, I want you to think about the power of the walk. I don't know if you thought about it or not, but the Bible presents a series of really important walks. You don't read very far in the book of Genesis, and here is God walking in the garden and calling out the name of Adam and asking, "Where are you?" Did God not know? Huh? Did God not? That's not a trick question. Did God not know? Oh, sure he knew. That's not why he asked the question. But that's a whole other lesson. I think about the man Abraham and the excruciating, painful walk that he had to do with son Isaac in tow up Mount Moriah. And every step taken by the old man as he climbed that mountain wasn't taken in agony just because of the physical exertion, but because of knowing what God had asked him to do. That was a hard walk. Then there was the walk of Moses and the Israelites through a body of water that opened up, and they walked through on dry land. And once they got to the other side of their walk, they turned around and they saw their pursuers coming through that same path. And they saw the waters come back together. That had to be a walk they would remember for the rest of their lives. Or I think about Joshua, the general Joshua leading the troops of Israel, walking around the walls of Jericho again and again and again. And if you do the math, you ever do the math on how many times they walked around that city? One time for what, 6 days? And then on the seventh day? So do the math. 7 plus 6? 13 times. That's a long walk, especially with people yelling at you and shouting and laughing and mocking you and all that kind of deal. I read in the New Testament of two men walking along a road 7 miles from where they had been in Jerusalem to their hometown of Emmaus, because they'd been in an upper room in Jerusalem and they've just endured the seeing Jesus crucified on Friday, and then the longest Sabbath in their lives was the next day. And I've always wondered, did they go to synagogue that Sabbath? Did they go to synagogue that Sabbath and sit with the leaders of the Jews who had actually been responsible for crucifying Jesus? I don't know. But that was a long day. And Sunday came. And by the afternoon, they couldn't take it anymore. And so there wasn't anything else to do. We'd just go home. So these two men walk to Emmaus, joined by this stranger, unrecognized by them, and it turns out to be the resurrected Jesus. And later they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us when we walked on the road with him and he explained the scriptures to us?" What a walk that was. Or in the example we gave in the last hour of Saul of Tarsus walking to Damascus. It would be a walk that changed that man's life forever. Or the walk of Jesus from the Praetorium to Golgotha, a walk that would change your life forever. And isn't it interesting how many times the Christian life is compared to a walk? Walk in a manner worthy of the calling with which you have been called. Ephesians 4:1, 1 Thessalonians 2:12, others. Walk. And all of those walks are important. But I want to talk about a walk that maybe we overlook. I want to talk about a walk of faith taken by one man the night Peter decided to get out of the boat and go for a walk on the water. And my point in this lesson is pretty simple. There are times when all of us need to get out of our comfort zone and go for a walk of faith. For we walk by faith and not by sight. Let's read the text in Matthew 14, beginning in verse 22. Just to make sure, let's familiarize ourselves, just to kind of get it in our minds. Matthew 14, beginning in verse 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side while he sent the crowds away. So Jesus tells them, go ahead and get in the boat, his 12 men. And then Jesus goes where in verse 23? He doesn't get in the boat with them. He goes where? He climbs a mountain to pray. And he sends them on ahead across the Sea of Galilee. Verse 24, now the boat was already a long distance from land, battered by waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, he came to them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it is a ghost. And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Peter said to him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said what? Come. Come. And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became frightened and beginning to sink. He cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? When they got into the boat, the wind stopped, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, you are certainly God's Son. Now, the first thing that strikes me about this is they're only crossing the Sea of Galilee. And that was no big deal for the likes of Peter and Andrew and James and John. Why? They were fishermen by vocation. Where did they fish? Sea of Galilee. It wasn't any problem for Thomas and Matthew and the other Simon. It wasn't a problem for those other guys, the other 8. They were all Galileans. They've gone back and forth across this body of water a lot. Now, it's a tricky body of water. I love geography and topography because there's some really cool things to learn. The Sea of Galilee is the lowest fresh body of water in the world. Did you know that? It's like 700 feet below sea level. Now, the Dead Sea is lower, but the Dead Sea is not fresh water, is it? Salt, okay. So the Sea of Galilee is the lowest fresh body of water in the world. The problem with the Sea of Galilee, topographically, is that to the north are these huge mountains. Mount Hermon to the north is almost 10,000 feet. In fact, the little nation of Israel has a ski resort on top of Mount Hermon today. I mean, it's snow covered about 10 months out of the year. It's this huge mountain. And then on the other side of the mountains, eventually the Mediterranean, okay? So it's really, you got the Mediterranean, you got these mountains, and then way down here you got the Sea of Galilee. And studying that just topographically and weather, just think about weather. I mean, storms happen on the Sea of Galilee really quick because the wind comes up over the mountains and then starts coming down and starts funneling. The mountain passes act as a funnel. And sometimes, if the conditions are right, the winds start funneling out across, and the winds can suddenly explode across the Sea of Galilee in a fury. And you see that a lot in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, as so many scenes of Jesus take place on this body of water. So this isn't the first time. It talks about a storm in Scripture. And this is not exactly a minor squall. Verse 24 says the boat they were in was battered by the waves. I have a marginal notation that says their boat was tormented by the waves. And John's account says they've been rowing 3 or 4 miles against a strong wind. And Matthew says it's getting late. It's between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the morning. And so they're exhausted. These men are exhausted. And they're not just worried about making it to the other side. They're worried about staying alive. And that's when they see the shadow of a man moving in their direction. Now, at first glance, verse 26, they thought they were seeing what? The ghost. And they were terrified, it says. Now, these men are not the kind of men easily scared. But it says they were terrified. I read a commentator on this, and he made the observation. He was kind of criticizing them. And he made this observation. He said, how could they not know this was Jesus? Who else do they think it would be? You know? And I thought about that, and I thought, wait. We do the same thing. Sometimes we can find our own selves terrorized by fear, battered by waves of turmoil and tragedy and trial that come into our lives. And we don't notice the nearness of God with any greater clarity than did they. So maybe we shouldn't be so quick to pronounce judgment on them. But here's the question. What is Jesus doing, and why is he doing this? In Mark, the 6th chapter, verse 48, Mark adds an element Matthew doesn't. And that's where it's so neat to kind of compare the four, because each kind of brings a different perspective on some things. And Mark adds a little element here. In Mark 6 and verse 48, seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. So far, it's the same thing Matthew says. And then Mark adds this. And he intended to what? Pass by. What? What's that about? He intended to pass them by? Well, I don't know, except that I do know that there are certain defining moments in Scripture where God presents himself to man in a striking way to communicate a message he doesn't want us to forget. That's why in the Old Testament, God put Moses in the cleft of the rock. We sing about that. Quote, while my glory passes by. On another occasion, he tells Elijah, go stand on the mountain, for I am passing by. Here comes Jesus walking on the water, intending to pass them by. Pattern? Maybe. But I know this, in each of these cases, it was a critical moment, and God needed to get their attention. This is God revealing himself in doing something only God can do. So before Jesus takes these 12 men any further in this work, he has to get their attention. And I think he succeeded. 12 men filled with confusion and terrorizing, paralyzing fear. And then one of them got an idea. Peter decided to go for a walk. So here's what I want to do. I want to take 2 Corinthians 5:7. We walk by faith and not by sight. And I want to bring it over into this scene in Matthew 14. Because I think in Matthew 14, we find four truths. Four truths about what it means to walk by faith. What it really looks like in real time. And the reason why this is important is because as men, in our families and churches, as men, in our faith, as men, we need to show what it means to walk by faith. And I think we learn in this passage in Matthew 14 what that looks like. So if you're taking notes, just here four things. Number one, if you're going to walk by faith, as the God-man, if you're going to walk by faith, you got to be willing to get out of your boat. You have to be willing to get out of your boat. Down through the years, artists have tried to take scenes like this and recreate them on canvas and paint pictures of what this might have looked like. And artists have done that for a long time. For example, Leonardo da Vinci was a masterful artist of the Renaissance. But I got to tell you, every time I see his painting of The Last Supper, I kind of smile a little bit because it's not exactly right. For one thing, Da Vinci has got them all seated Western style, like you and I'd sit at Cracker Barrel or some other place, okay? But the second thing that's odd in the painting, he's got them all seated on the same side. I had a friend of mine, and back when I was doing local church work, about 5, 6 years ago. Anyway, he's one of these guys. Maybe there's a guy like this in this congregation. He's always got a joke, funny thing. And he calls me up one day and he said, "Hey," he said, "do you know what the last thing said at the Last Supper was?" I said, "No, Jim, I have no idea." He said, "Yeah, Jesus said, 'Hey, fellas, if you want to get in the picture, get on this side of the table.'" I think about that every time I see that painting. Okay? But we used to have this big Bible, and growing up, Dad would read the Bible every night to us. And I used to, as a kid, I'd get that Bible and I'd start flipping through it. And a big old King James Bible about that thick. And I'd flip through, and there were color pictures that artists have painted of various scenes. And there was a painting of this Jesus walking on the water. And I remember to this day, Jesus is in this painting, Jesus is in this long flowing gown. And the moon is bright, shiny, glimmering on the surface of the sea. And it's just silky smooth. And in the painting, you can just see Jesus stepping gingerly along the water. Oh, it is so calming. It is so serene. What's wrong with that? It's a storm. I mean, the waves are just like crazy. And the wind and the darkness of the night. And these guys are exhausted. And you know as well as I do, when you get exhausted, you start sometimes even thinking, man, I might be hallucinating, I remember years ago, we used to live in Houston for a couple of years. And then the grandkids started getting born, and we decided to move back to Tennessee. So I finished my work in Houston on a Sunday night, and I got in the truck, and I was pulling a U-Haul, and Julie was already in Nashville. And so I thought, I'm going to drive all night. And that worked out really well until about the time I got between Little Rock and Memphis. Man, I'm getting sleepy. So I put the windows down on the truck, and I turn on my music, And I got the Doobie Brothers and China Grove. I mean, I got it blaring really, really loud, and I'm singing and singing and singing, and that went really good. Until I got almost to Memphis. I got to West Memphis, Arkansas, and I ran out of gas. Not my truck. My truck had gas. I ran out of gas. And I started, when you get so sleepy, you start seeing stuff. It's like, I had to get off the road. And I pull off the road, West Memphis. And I could see Memphis, you know. I knew I crossed the river, I'd be in Tennessee, but, you know, I thought, you just have to kind of take a break and take a rest because it's just not safe. And I think about these guys in this boat, and they've been rowing all night long. They've been working. And they think they're seeing something, and in their minds they're seeing a ghost. And then Peter gets this idea. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, no, Peter, you better play it safe. Stay in the boat. Stay in the boat. Is that what Jesus said? What did Jesus say? Get out of the boat. Come over here to where I am. Now, the boat represents the safe place, the secure place. The water is the opposite. In fact, logically, if he gets out of the boat and onto the water, a lot of really bad things can happen. But on the other hand, if he doesn't get out of the boat, there's like a 100% guaranteed certainty that he'll never walk on the water. Guaranteed. So he's got a choice. Now, what's the application to this? I mean, what does that have to do with me? Okay, here it is. If you and I are going to walk by faith, we have to get out of the boat, meaning that each of us has a boat. Your boat is what represents safety for you. Your boat is what's kind of your comfort zone, your safety zone. It's where we're tempted to put our trust. And Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 6, he says, speaking of trust, where your treasure is, that's where your heart's going to be. So for some of us, our money is our boat. For some of us, our vocation is our boat. We talk about job security. For some people, relationships for some people, success is their boat. They're all about success. One time, Jesus asked a young man, we don't even know his name, we just call him the rich young ruler. And using our analogy here, Jesus asked the rich young ruler to get out of his boat. He said, I don't want to get out of my boat because he had a really nice boat, you know. Jesus said, get out of your comfort zone. And here's something else to think about. Churches have comfort zones. Churches have boats too. I've been in some churches that their building was their boat. That really, as I spent some time there, I began to realize it's all about a physical plant. They've not moved past what that is, what really it is. Or tradition becomes a boat. This is the way we've always done it, and we ain't ever going to change. And it doesn't matter if maybe there are some other ways, maybe even some better ways to think about that we can do some things while staying in bounds of biblical teaching. But no, tradition becomes our boat. Or saving money becomes more important than anything else. Two things. People like to stay in their boat. And they don't want anybody rocking it. But what if it's the Lord who rocks your boat? And what if it's the Lord who says, I'm standing out here. Get out of your comfort zone and walk over here to where I am. I was in an assembly last week. I wasn't preaching last Sunday. I was home. And it was so cool because there was a 70-something-year-old brother in the congregation who asked if he could preach a sermon. He had never preached a sermon before. And he's 70-something years old. Kind of rough around the edges as all get out. Country. And he got up and preached a sermon from his heart that I don't think I'll ever forget. And he started by saying, you know, I'm not a preacher. This is my first time to do this. And usually we think about a first-time speaker, maybe he's a teenager or something. This guy's in his 70s. And he was willing to get out of his boat. How about that? So if we're going to walk by faith, we have to be willing to get out of our comfort zone. Secondly, if we're going to walk by faith, it doesn't mean that the storm is just going to go away. On another time, Jesus was in the middle of the storm and he stood up and said, hush, be still. But do you notice it doesn't happen on this time? Peter's going to get out of the boat and walk on the water and the storm doesn't go away. The point is sometimes we think if I just have faith, then everything's going to, all the hurts, all the heart, it's just going to go away. May not go away. But Peter says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. Now Peter's got a dilemma. What is it? Well, he's got the wind, but he's also got 22 eyes locked on him. And what's going on in their minds? Huh? Let's see how far he's going to take this one. Have they heard him shoot off his mouth before? Ha! Let's see what he does with this one, And Julie says, I have a crazy imagination, but in my mind, I see Peter going over, he's got all these eyes looking on him, and he's like, oh, now I got to go through with this. And in my mind's eye, I see Peter going to the edge of the boat. He's looking back at all those guys, and he throws a leg over. And he's looking back at all those guys. And I'm wondering if he said, are the guys going to rescue me? Are the guys going to stand up and say, hey, Peter, don't do this? And nobody says anything. He throws another leg over. Nobody says anything. And then he does something crazy, off the charts religious. He lets go. He abandons his life to Jesus. And for a moment, Peter is smiling, Jesus is smiling. And then verse 30, as he's walking toward Jesus, verse 30, what happens? He sees the wind. He sees the effects of the wind. He became frightened. He begins to sink. And he cries out and says, what? Lord, save me. I wrote down the words reality check right there. Reality check. Because I'll just tell you, it's easy to read that Bible verse, walk by faith and not by sight. It's not easy to do it. I don't know if you've noticed it or not, but everything in life is risky. Everything. I read a statistic the other day in a medical journal. It talked about, it was kind of a funny statistic, about how many people, and it was 25,000 people, generally on average, about 25,000 people, are treated in hospital emergency rooms every year in this country for injuries they sustained when they fell out of bed. So you think about that tonight when you get in bed, Even going to bed is risky. It is risky. Everything is risky. There's a guy by the name of Larry Lawden. He wrote a book on risk management. It's really a business book. But he makes a really good point here. He says, we live in a society that is so fear-driven, we suffer risk lock. It is a lot like traffic gridlock in that we become so afraid we are unable to take the necessary steps that would energize our lives. Why? Because it's risky. It's risky. Several years ago, I had my little granddaughter with me. I was in a meeting in Lexington, Kentucky, and she was probably 10. She just turned 20, so it's about a decade ago. And so we went to Kentucky Horse Park one day, which is kind of a theme park for horses, if you like horses and all that kind of deal. She loved horses, and we had horses, and so, but she wanted to go, so we went, and we did we saw all the horse shows and different things, and she said, can we go on the trail ride at 2 o'clock? And I said, sure, absolutely. So we go over to the stables to go on the trail ride. And before you can go on the trail ride, they hand me like 4 pages of legalese. 4 pages of little print that tells me that if I go on this trail ride, I will die. That this horse can kill me. And then it lists all the ways this horse can kill me, hurt me, get startled, whatever. But that if you sign this form, we'll let you go on the trail ride because you cannot hold us liable for any injury or death. Okay? So I did what every one of you would do. I signed it. Okay, done. and we went on the trail ride. Well, they divided the group into two groups. There was the experienced riders, people who ride, and there were people who didn't, and so we're in two different groups. And so I'm over here with the experienced group, but everybody gets their horses. Everybody has a horse matched up, except me. And the wrangler comes out, and he says, "You're good with any horse?" And I said, "I think so." And he says, "Well, we've got just the horse for you." And it sounded funny when he said that. And so I looked over, and out of the barn, they're leading this. It was the biggest horse I've ever seen in my life. It was a Belgian. Think Clydesdale. I mean, this thing is huge. And they bring him out of the barn, and they say his name is Big Boy. And I thought, well, that fits. And they bring this horse out of the barn. And they say he's the most gentle horse in the barn. He loves to go on trail rides, but because of his size, everybody's afraid of him, and he hardly ever gets to go. If you're okay with him, we'd love for him to be able to go, and you can ride him, and you'll have a great time. And I said, okay. I said, but I have a question. I said, what's your question? I said, how do I get on this thing? They had to bring a step ladder out. I had to go up about 3 rungs to get high enough to throw a leg over that thing. Now I'm up on top of Big Boy, and I'm sitting there, and we start our trail ride. And within about a minute or two, I figured out why nobody rides these horses. Because their girth is so wide. My right leg is going in that direction, and my left leg is going in that direction. And after about a minute or two, I'm done. I'm ready for the trail ride to be over. And I think about all those pages of legalese, and not one word said that you'll never walk straight again the rest of your life. I mean, you talk about risky? Yeah, everything is risky. You can use the baseball analogy, people do. Well, if I step up to the plate, I might strike out. Well, yeah, you will. Even the best ones do. But if you never are willing to step up to the plate, you'll never know what it's like to hit a home run either. And if we don't get out of the boat, if we don't get out of our comfort zone, we'll never know what it's like to walk by faith. Third thing, if we're going to walk by faith, we have to accept the challenges of life as the price we pay to grow. We have to accept the challenges of life as the price we pay to grow. I want you to look at verse 30. Seeing the wind, he became frightened. Some translations say, he became afraid. So here's the question. Did Peter fail? Go down the checklist. Failure. Did his faith waver? Yeah. Did he take his eyes off Jesus? Yeah. Did he sink down in the water? Did he cry, Lord, save me? Look at that. Yes, 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 yes. He failed. That's not the story. The story of failure is not Peter. He's the only one who had the faith to get out of the boat. The story of failure in the passage is these 11 guys who never got out of the boat. We don't talk about them. We ignore them. We only talk about and preach sermons about the one guy who actually had the faith to get out of the boat. And because he got out of the boat, he was the only one of the 12 who actually walked on the water. He was the only one of the 12 who did something man isn't capable of doing on his own. And he was the only one of the 12 who knew what it was like to become afraid and lift up his hand and find his hand grasped by Jesus and pulled to safety. Because he got out of the boat. He shared a moment with Jesus the other 11 never did. So maybe the worst failure in our lives is not the fear of sinking, but the fear that keeps us in our comfort zone. Men, dads, grandfathers, listen, you and I will never be the leader of God's man of steel and velvet until we have the faith to get out of the boat. Mike Penn is a friend of mine down in Lufkin, Texas, owns a ranch, has a ranch. And several years ago, Mike, he's several houses on the ranch. And I think Mike's daughter and son-in-law and grandson lived on the ranch, another house. And so One day Mike goes out to the barn, gets in his big John Deere, and he's going to go out to the field and bring some hay to another pasture. And so Mike gets in his John Deere and backs out of the barn and goes in the field. And what Mike didn't realize was his little grandson at age 3 had heard that tractor start and made a beeline for that barn. And Mike never saw him. And Mike backed over that little boy. And when Mike's out in the field and he sees all this commotion back at the barn, something was wrong, and he turns around and he comes back, and that's when he figured out what had happened. And the little boy didn't make it. And Mike, who was an elder in that congregation, and a father and a grandfather, Mike gathered his family in the living room of that house. And he set them all down. And in essence, he said, if our faith means anything, it's got to mean everything right now. And they sat there and they cried together and they prayed together and they trusted together. That was a Saturday. And the next morning on Sunday, Mike led his family into that church building and they sat where they always sat. And Mike led a whole congregation to see what it really means to walk by faith. One final thing. If we're going to walk by faith, that's when we connect with God. That's when we connect with Him. There's a lot of reasons to get out of our boat, get out of our comfort zone, but the number one reason is the water is where Jesus is. And Jesus says, come. Come. Now, as men, we want to comfort code everything. We want to maintain this illusion, I'm in control. And so we want to get this life where everything is predictable, where everything is secure. We ensure everything because I'm in control. And then God reminds you you're not in control. Or Satan comes along and says, you see him? You let me sift him like wheat and he'll turn on you. Isn't that what Satan asked to do to Peter? Satan has asked permission to sift you like wheat. I wonder sometimes if you and I aren't a part of that conversation. But all the while, regardless of what goes on in our lives, all the while Jesus is here. He hasn't left us. And He says, brother, get out of your comfort zone and come stand with me. But Lord, what if I sink? Come stand with me. I will not let you sink. Come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now I want to show you one more thing. Verse 31. Immediately Jesus stretched out His hand and took hold of him and said to him, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Verse 32. When they, plural, when they got into the boat, the wind stopped. How did Jesus get back into the boat? He walked where? On the water. How did Peter get back in the boat? Do you ever think about that? How did Peter get back in the boat? You think Jesus just grabbed Peter's hand, lifted him to safety, said, oh, you of little faith, and let go, and says, hope you can swim? You think that was it? Or do you think Jesus lifted him back up and together they got back into the boat? I can't delineate the specifics of that, but it just says, and they got back into the boat. So maybe it's time for all of us to quit making excuses as to why we can't do this, that, whatever, and step out of our comfort zone. This came home to me years ago when I was in a meeting in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, down on the Alabama border. And there was this brother there. And that morning, as soon as the amen was said at the end of service, all of a sudden, and I didn't know what was coming, all of a sudden, I raised my head and I hear this loud, booming voice. Now let us all shake hands and be friendly. What in the world is this? And I thought, well, maybe he's a visitor. Maybe he doesn't know church etiquette. I don't know. I didn't think any more about it till that night. We had services again. We came back. The closing prayer, amen. Now let us all shake hands and be friendly. And I thought, I got to meet this guy. And so I found him. I met him. He said, Brother Adams, my name is Seth McGill. I said, Seth, I got to ask you a really interesting question. I said, why do you do that? I said, I think it's great. I got to ask you, what motivates you to do that? He said, Brother Adams, I was out mowing my yard one day. And he said, I got to thinking, what can I do for the Lord? He said, I can't preach. He said, I can't even wait on the table. They asked me to lead a prayer. I get all tongue-tied, nervous, and he said, I can't lead singing. What can I do? I just want to do something. And he said, I'm out mowing my yard, and it hit me. He said, I thought, at the end of every service, maybe I can remind my brothers and sisters to shake hands and be friendly. He said, that's what I do. And I gave him he was a big guy. I gave him a big hug. He gave me a big hug. Broke me, but he gave me this hug. And I said, man, keep on doing it. I said, there are places all over this country. I would love to take you. I would love to take you and shake them up a little bit, Let us all shake hands and be friendly. That man was willing to get out of his boat. May God help us, whether it comes to stepping out of our boat and maybe trying to do something we haven't done before, encouraging others, going to a funeral home. I had a guy come up and tell me, I don't go to funeral homes. He said, I don't know what to say. I don't go. Do you ever think about that if you go to a funeral home, they're not going to remember what you said? Do you ever think about that? But they are going to remember what? You showed up. So show up. It's not hard to put your arm around somebody and say, hey, I'm praying for you. That's not hard. Show up. Get out of the boat and show up. There's all kinds of applications to this. All kinds. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you this morning, because I thought, what can I share with the men that kind of fits the overall theme of connecting Christ? And I thought, Peter, boat, 12 men. One man gets out of the boat. And I think that one man is an example for you and for me. Anything we can add before we close? Other than the women will probably talk longer. But you don't have to say that I said that. Anything anybody want to add to this that I missed or observation? Feel free. Yes, sir.
I like something more simple and interesting. We just went to Mark and Dr. Matthew. Notice Mark didn't say anything about Peter stepping out of that boat. Not once. Didn't say anything about that conversation except that Jesus said it's me.
Which is interesting, because most scholars think, Mark wasn't an eyewitness to this. Most people think Mark wrote his gospel as he interviewed Peter, which makes that really interesting. When Peter might have said, leave me out of it. Focus on this, leave me out of it. So I hadn't thought about that, but that's exactly right. Anybody else? All right, let's take a stretch break. Okay.